Perspective. Dr. Kaiser Nyatsumba, a chartered director, a turnaround strategy expert, business rescue practitioner, the author of just under 20 books, and a former newspaper editor. Welcome to Perspective, Dr. Kaiser Nyatsumba's podcast that focuses on business, politics, corporate governance, social issues, English grammar, and anything else that takes his fancy. The first talk show host on SABC1, where he presented Dilemma in Perspective, Dr. Nyatsumba now presents his hard-hitting, no-holds-barred podcast, Dr. Kaiser's Perspective. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We have just heard the State of the Nation address presented by President Cyril Ramaphosa in Parliament a few days ago. The speech itself cannot be faulted. President Ramaphosa is known to deliver uplifting speeches in a manner that is most pleasing to the ear. The man speaks well. The content of his speech, which lasted for just under 2 hours, was vast. It touched on just about everything that falls under his ministers' respective portfolios. Personally, I counted at least 20 different topics that found expression in his speech. Obviously, some were more important and more urgent than others, but none of them, I argue, could be said to have been unimportant. For me, among the most important announcements made in the speech were the following. 1, the deployment of the South African National Defence Force to help to bring some semblance of stability in gang-infested crime hotspots in the Western Cape and to combat illegal mining in Gauteng. Next, the steps to address the water crisis in Gauteng and other parts of the country. Thirdly, the establishment of special courts to deal with tender disputes. And finally, the digital visa dispensation that will soon be available to anybody wanting to visit South Africa. Typically, much of what was contained in that State of the Nation address has been said before, although delivery on those promises has been slow. As for the much-hyped national dialogue, my views on it were expressed in this podcast last month. It will be a colossal waste of time. If you have not yet listened to that podcast to hear my reasons for that conclusion, I urge you to do so after this one. By all accounts, the State of the Nation address was impressive. As always, it was delivered with a great deal of confidence and charisma by President Ramaphosa. The challenge, as always, will be whether the wonderful things mentioned by the President in that address will be delivered upon. As we know, this government has not covered itself in glory when it comes to performance. We will have to wait, therefore, to see what unfolds in the months ahead. However impressive the speech may have been, the country's challenges are so vast that they will need the dedicated attention of all 3 spheres of government, with each of them appointing the most qualified and capable people into respective positions, including in state-owned enterprises that are under their respective areas of control. That means that the ANC would have to be prepared to jettison its beloved cadre deployment policy in favor of competence and qualifications. As is always the case, the reactions of the different political parties was predictable. Overall, opposition parties panned the speech, while the ANC and most of the parties in the Government of National Unity praised it. The Umkhonto weSizwe Party, as the country's official opposition, dismissed the speech as a complete waste of time. Although the EFF welcomed the deployment of soldiers in the Western Cape and Gauteng, the organization's leader, Julius Malema, was critical of the president's propensity to govern through task teams. President Ramaphosa's sudden flurry of promises, according to Action SA parliamentary leader Athol Trollip, ring hollow. Now, as was to be expected, ANC Treasurer-General Dr. Gwen Ramokgopa was effusive with praise for the president's address. Not only was she very inspired by it, but she also went on to describe it as a speech that would, quote, leave a legacy for the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa. That contention is what I want to engage with today. I do beg to differ with Dr. Ramokgopa. Even she, I suggest, must know that a sweeping statement was a gross exaggeration that was made with an eye on the end of the Ramaphosa presidency. However brilliant they may be, speeches do not, of themselves, make or define a legacy. Instead, it is a leader's actions or inaction that defines his legacy. In other words, it is the things that a leader managed or failed to accomplish while in office that define his or her legacy. For instance, however memorable President Nelson Mandela's inaugural speech was, you may recall that it was in that speech that he said, never, never and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. That speech still did not define Mandela's legacy as a president. Nor, by the way, did Thabo Mbeki's lyrical Amen African speech, nor did it define his deputy presidency or his subsequent presidency. Instead, it was his unwavering commitment to reconciliation that globally came to define Mandela's legacy. And it was his astute management of the economy that came to define Mbeki's presidency. The latter's negative legacy, however, remains his equivocation on AIDS, HIV/AIDS, and is causing up to an increasingly dictatorial President Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. We all know President Jacob Zuma's legacy in South Africa. It was a legacy of shameless, extensive corruption and state capture that was well catalogued during the SONA Commission. On the positive side, however, his legacy includes the construction of 2 new universities in the only provinces that did not previously have such institutions in the country. And although this was opportunistically done on the eve of the ANC's 2017 national elections, the free tertiary education dispensation for Indian students in the country must also count as one of Jacob Zuma's positive legacies. What then will be President Ramaphosa's legacy during his term of office? As of now, his positive legacy must, in my view, include the turnaround and stabilization of critical institutions like the South African Revenue Service, SARS, and to a limited extent, the National Prosecuting Authority. While South Africa experienced the worst forms of load shedding during his presidency, his legacy must also include the still ongoing restructuring of Eskom into 3 divisions and the liberalization of the energy dispensation in the country. Should Ramaphosa be content with these legacies? Without doubt, these developments are all major. But for me, it is the Eskom restructuring and the liberalization of the energy sector that will long outlive him. On their own, these were major contributions to South Africa. Some will no doubt point out that were he more decisive, much bolder and less tentative in his leadership style, Ramaphosa could have gone down in history as the president who did much more to turn the country's fortunes around. And I agree with that assessment. After all, the South Africa that he inherited presented him with many opportunities to be a messiah. Maybe he will surprise us yet, although based on his hitherto track record, that seems highly unlikely. He has spoken about the introduction of a high-speed rail system in the country and the development of a smart city for a few years now. And he has repeated his high-speed rail vision in this year's State of the Nation address. Were he to pull that off, it would be one of his major positive legacies. Although he had long left office when the Gautrain service was finally commissioned, Mbazima Shilowa was the first Gauteng Premier to talk about the need for a high-speed train service in the province. That is why some still call the Gautrain the Shilowa Express. Since it was thanks to his vision that we have the Gautrain today, it must count as his legacy. By the same token, if sometime in the not-so-distant future, South Africa were to have the high-speed train service often mentioned by President Ramaphosa, that too could legitimately count as one of his legacies. That, however, will definitely not include the State of the Nation address on Thursday, 12 February 2026. On the negative side, it must be said, his legacy will be one of indecision and, of course, the Pala money in the couch saga. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching Dr. Kaiser Nyatsumba's Perspective podcast. Please subscribe to it and share the content. To contact Dr. Kaiser Nyatsumba with a business proposal, a comment, or a suggested topic, write to the email address kaiser@kaiser.nyatsumba.com. Again, that was kaiser@kaiser.nyatsumba.com.